In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. And happy 6-year anniversary to the Daily Memphian, by the way. 6 years ago today, the Daily Memphian came to exist. I think that is something we have to mention on this show. I haven't been here all 6 years, Chris. You started from the beginning.
From the beginning, I was one of the first, among the first group, even before the launch. And so it's been a good run. I was told when I made the jump that everything was like, I don't know if I should say this, but I think I will. I mean, I said, assure me at least 4 years. It's a brand new thing. This thing can't like crash and burn in 6 months. I can't afford to do this. Guarantee me that at least 4 years we're going to be good. And I was guaranteed for at least that. I mean, they thought beyond that. That was guaranteed, at least that. Don't worry, you're safe. We have at least a 4-year runway to get this thing off the ground. And here we are, 6 years, and we're in the air and we're flying. So good stuff.
Yeah, I joined a little bit later than you, but by then I could see the good work that was being done by you and others. And so definitely needed to shout that out for sure. Been a great place to work. Been awesome so far, and have loved being able to do the Grizzlies beat. This morning, I was over at FedEx Forum. The Grizzlies were holding a Get Revved Up to Vote voter registration event over there, headlined by, do you have a guess at what player showed up to encourage folks to register?
That's been one of Jaron's sort of pet issues since draft night, really. And so I assume that's the Jaren Jackson Jr. thing. Good for him.
Jaren Jackson Jr., of course, was there encouraging people to register to vote. Also got Cam Spencer and Jalen Wells to not only show up to the event, but to register to vote, both of them in this upcoming election. And so good for them. Jaren says he deserves the assist on that. You got to put that one in the box score. He gets the assist on Cam Spencer and Jalen Wells. Now, did you determine whether they had already been registered in their previous states, or are they going to be first-time voters?
Cam Spencer's 24. I'm going to hope he was already registered in Connecticut or wherever.
I didn't ask that.
Right. But you got to re-register if you want to vote in Tennessee.
Correct.
I have re-registered in the state of Minnesota. I'm a registered voter now in Minnesota.
That's enough politics talk for this podcast. Jaren also spoke about a couple of different things. One of the things I really wanted to touch on, we've already talked about Gigi and Gigi's injury a little bit. On that, he just basically said it sucks. Jaren's had the same injury before.
Right.
And he kind of downplayed the severity of it and said, thankfully it's not a crazy injury to have. It's something you can come back from, I guess, relatively easily as a basketball player. For him, it was smooth sailing, at least, coming back from that injury. And he said the key for Gigi is going to be, or at least it was for him, don't stop going, get stronger, do your rehab, try to find a way to be involved in something. Don't step away from the game, because that's how your development slows down. I mean, step away if you have to, take the time off to let it heal, but then get right back at it and start working again. So I think Jaren was it was good to hear Jaren sort of be positive about it, because I think that can kind of give you an indication of where things stand there with Gigi. Still looking like he's going to miss a month of the regular season, 3 months overall, and should be back, I would guess, at some point in December, which seems the most likely. But we've already discussed all of that. The other thing that Jaren touched on, and something that I've been writing about a little bit recently, was the coaching staff.
Right.
And in doing so, he said, I'm very excited for everybody to see what this plan is going to look like when we step out there, that the coaching staff feels very connected in a way. He said that was kind of the notable thing about it, as if they're all kind of on the same page of what this plan is going to look like. I mean, you hope for that. What else is he going to say? But I found that to be notable, in part because, one of the biggest problems for this team over the last few years has been its half-court offense, right? And we've seen 2 hires made now in which I think they're hoping that it helps fix the half-court offense. The Patrick St. Andrews hire last year, and now, this year they're bringing in Tuomas Asalo, and he's supposed to be a guy that can sort of fix the half-court offense. I looked into it a little bit, and it's really interesting if you look over the last couple of years with the half-court offense. I'm sure this is something you've already dove into previously at some point. When they were functional, when they were I'm looking for the word here. When it worked, it was because they were a really good offensive rebounding team.
Right.
But based on plays, 100 plays per 100 plays, the offense has not been very good in the half court.
The Grizzlies this is like a generational thing at this point. The Grizzlies have had a below average half court offense almost every year for like 20 something years, like go pre-Taylor Jenkins or whatever. But during this era, it's true. Now, ultimately, the reason the half-court offense in particular is the thing you focus on is because there's this idea that you get into playoff basketball and that becomes more important. In a broad sense, it matters how good your offense is, And so 3 years ago when the Grizzlies won 56 games, depends on what site you look at, different places calculate different ways, but they generally had a top 5. They had a top 5 overall offense the year they won 56 games. They had a bottom 10 half-court offense that year, right? And so, the recipe was such that you generated a top 5 offense. But the concern was, does that carry over into playoff basketball if your top 5 offense is dependent on frequency of transition attempts and offensive rebounding? Is that same driver of a top 5 offense going to carry over into a playoff setting, or is it not? Do you need something that's going to be sturdier than that? Do you need... Even if it yields the 7th best offense overall instead of the 4th, is it a sturdier recipe that's going to taste as good when you get in the playoff series? So I think that is the reason for the focus on half-court offense, I think specifically.
I think 2 things are true. One, it is true that more half-court offense is played in the playoffs.
Right.
You can go look at the percentage of plays the Grizzlies are playing in half-court during the regular season over the last 3 years, and the percentage of plays that they're playing in the half court in the playoffs, and it almost always goes up.
Right.
And that's for every team across the board. And so that is true. The other thing I think is true is that the teams that are the best at half court offense very typically are the best teams in the playoffs. Like, who was the number 1 team 2 years ago when the Grizzlies were in the playoffs? Grizzlies had the worst half court offense in the playoffs over the course of that Lakers series. Number 1 team in half-court offense was Denver. They won the championship that year. And so it's a critical thing to fix. It might be the number 1 thing to fix. And I think you've had an emphasis really on 2 things when they switched the staff around. Is they promoted a lot of player development coaches and brought in a lot of player development coaches and really put a focus on that. And they also brought in guys to fix the half-court offense over the last 2 years. And Asalo is fascinating to me because his half-court offense numbers have been very good in Europe. You never know how it's going to translate. But he's just a really interesting character. Like, he coached in Germany and was really successful with a team that had a budget that was nothing like a lot of the other teams in the league. The way that league operates is entirely different than the NBA, but he still was really good. And then he moves to Paris basketball, and 6 of his players follow him over there. Which also doesn't happen often, but they believed in him so much that they took lesser contracts to play for Paris basketball so that they could keep playing underneath him. I think that speaks to, being a player's coach and players liking you. I think that's definitely encouraging, and that'll be important when he gets to Memphis. The other thing that's interesting to me is their backcourt was like really similar to what the Grizzlies have. They had like this dynamic guard that attacked the basket. TJ Shorts, he's like 5'8", what a perfect name for a 5'8" point guard. And then they had a sharpshooter next to him in the backcourt. And like they were able to use those guards and be incredibly successful in the Euro Cup and in that league in France. And so I think that there should be some confidence that he can help them. When you look at what needs to be fixed or what is most important or how these coaching, where these coaching changes can impact the Grizzlies on the court, like what should the priorities be?
I don't know. I mean, I'm anxious to see them play. I suspect that the changes in language and lingo will be more pronounced than the changes in actual basketball. I think, we've already got Taylor Jenkins literally said, I'm giving you a sneak preview or whatever the language was. He basically winked and said, here's our new lingo. And he started talking about collective basketball and advantage creation. And he's going to say all this stuff and people are going to say this stuff back to him. But what matters is what happens on the floor in terms of scoring and not scoring and all of that. Yeah. We'll see. I mean, I think how they use, Zach Edey's screening, there was some idea you're going to get away from a big man screening. Well, they drafted Zach Edey. They're not getting away from that. And so how do they use that, right? Do they screen? And I'm not an X's and O's guys, but do you screen higher out? Do you screen from different angles? Do you get your ball handlers more of a head of steam as they go into those actions, right? And is Zach Edey, so do you create more space off of that? And does that space collapse the defense more? Do you get more open threes off that? And then is Zach Edey more effective not only creating that space, but cleaning up, in a way that Steven Adams, as great as he was at creating the space, was not the greatest finisher, in the paint. And so can you get the benefit of the kind of screening stuff you got from Steven Adams, but with more scoring out of that position itself? Are you going to get that rim pressure that the Grizzlies have gotten at their best? Are you going to be able to pair that rim pressure with better 3-point shooting and get both those things going at the same time? I think that's your recipe. If you can get the rim pressure and get the attack the paint stuff and then get better 3-point shooting off of that. And I think the Grizzlies have struggled to excel in both of those areas or get both of those things sort of going at the same time,
I think you're right. I think you can get ready to be prepared to be worn out with the collective basketball idea. Like that was something that there's podcasts out there Asalo was using 4 years ago on different shows talking about, his strategy to the game. And I mean, I guess the idea behind it, I don't want to bore people, but the idea behind it is more like you're running a 2-man game with Ja and Edey, but Ja's read is not going to be, 2 or 3 things when he's coming off of a ball screen. It's going to be everybody watching the ball screen at one time and reacting accordingly and having this flow to the offense where you don't have to run set plays as much and it wastes time of the opportunity with the shot clock. And so I think that's kind of this idea behind it. And it's also interesting, you brought up the LaRoche stuff of the no pick and roll. Obviously they're going to do all that. But there is a lot of language that overlaps even with him and with Asalo too. The advantage creation stuff definitely is a big overlap there. This idea of, we're going to reverse engineer scoring baskets. We're going to think about what the defender has to do in a situation. And then we're going to try to create that situation for the defender backwards to figure out how we're going to score. It's interesting stuff if you're into the coaching thing. I think Grizzlies fans just want to see the team score points.
Well, I guess for me, it's more about what actually happens in execution, because it's sort of like the 10 pounds of muscle thing that happened. Every run up to every season, there's language about what we're going to do stylistically and what we're going to do. The old joke used to be that every coach would say we're going to run more. Mike Fratello would come out before the season and say we're going to run more. No, you're not. You're Mike Fratello. You're not going to run more. But it was a thing that every coach had to say, right? And so there's always going to be sort of theoretical, this is what we're going to do stuff. And sometimes that stuff gets done and sometimes it does not. And so I'm in sort of a little bit of a wait and see mode of, I'm interested in trying to figure out when they start playing basketball. I'm interested in figuring out what is happening. I'm a little bit less interested in figuring out and proclaiming what's going to happen before it happens a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Jaron said he likes the plan. He's not going to tell us what the plan is, but it is different. Like, it is clearly different this year. I guess the way that they're going about the offense. You know, Asala said in an interview like a year ago or earlier this year, that I guess this offense is like closer to Mike D'Antoni than it is, you know, what you see the Celtics doing, right?
Right.
And I'm curious to see how that's going to work.
It's interesting. See. I mean, these questions are interesting to me once you sort of get into a play context. Like there's been, like you talked about the Mike D'Antoni stuff, like famously 7 seconds or less, right? Let's get into things quick. And for all this focus on the Grizzlies need to have a better half-court offense, which I think is true, they shouldn't forget about trying to avoid half-court offense. Because no matter how good your half-court offense is, your transition offense is better. And so the more you can play in transition, the better it's going to be, you know. And I guess that gets harder in playoff basketball, but, you know, let's try to win 55 games, you know? And let's have John Morant, like, get down the floor and, like, get easy baskets.
That's fun basketball to watch, too.
And the Celtics thing is, like, you know, a lot of threes. And one article of faith among, you know, so-called analytic circles in the NBA over the last 10 years is that you're better on offense if you shoot more threes. It's not even about making them. It's about taking them. The more threes you shoot, the better you are. And there's a lot of correlation there. There's a lot of truth there. You know what happened with the Grizzlies last season? And this is not causal. This is just the team blew up. But the Grizzlies were, again, depends on what site you look at, but on cleaning the glass, Grizzlies were top 5 in the percentage of their shots that came from 3, which was out of character. They took way more threes than they like ever. And they were the worst offense in the NBA. That's not because you took more threes. It's the other way around. You've taken all these threes because you couldn't do anything else, right? You couldn't generate whatever. And so, you know, in some ways, and these are sort of, I was taking some notes this morning, so this is stuff I'll write at some point in the preseason when I get into this stuff. But like in some ways, basketball is like a really simple game, right? You got one ball, you got 5 guys, you're just going up and down the floor. Like it's always a playground, right? But it's also like really complicated in some ways. And so when you're talking about team offense, you have all these different sort of spheres of activity. There's the question of distance, like how many shots you're getting at the rim, how many shots you're getting in the lane, how much you're getting from mid-range, how much you're getting from 3. And then there's this question of sort of time and speed, right? Like how many shots you're getting in transition, how many shots you're getting in half court, how many shots you're having to force late in the shot clock. There's this clock and speed thing. And then there's like who's getting the shots, you know? Like, you know, it's one thing for Zach Edey to get a shot in the lane. It's another thing for Luke Kennard to get a shot in the lane. So who's getting the shots where? And so these are like 3 different complicated things. And you got to take all 3 of them and stack them on top of each other. And the charge to your coaching staff is to take all 3 of these complicated things, put them together into one thing in a way that maximizes the performance of your team. Like we could be here all day trying to talk about that. You know, it's really complicated and it's going to be interesting to watch, you know, coming off the season they lost with some new coaching staff, not a fully new coaching staff, but some new coaches, some new concepts and plans, some new language, some new players, and to figure out how they try to put all that together. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And again, like some of this idea, and this is what everybody is searching for, so it's very basic and it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's like they want to have a high true shooting percentage and get a lot of shots. Like that has always been.
It's a good combination.
Right. If you do that, if you take more shots and you have a higher true shooting percentage, you're going to win 100%
shoot well and
of the
shoot
games
a lot. Sure, go for that.
And so that's the goal here. That's what they're going to try to create. But I mean, like, again, you got to throw out last year, but you can't play at the 18th fastest pace and then have the worst half-court offense. It just doesn't work. And like
but last season is just not. I mean, last season
you got to throw it out.
There's so little. Like we're all going to try, but there's just so little to really pull out of last season that's instructive to me. It was just such a mess. Really nothing. But to your point about the transition, I agree. I think they should try to play in transition. Problem is, even if you're the number 1 transition team, and you play in transition the most in the NBA, right?
You're still going to be taking 75% of your possessions are still going to be in the half court.
I mean, so much of this stuff, you're talking about small differences that, you know, the difference between the best offense and the worst offense is like, you know, 4 or 5 points per 100 possessions. You know, it's that kind of thing, right? And so these are fine gradations in some of this stuff. And you're right. Generally speaking, you're going to play 75 to 80% of the half court and 20 to 25% in transition. That's sort of just the way basketball works. But that little 3% each way is going to, make a difference.
It does make a difference. And I do think, again, they should try to play in transition, and it's a more fun brand of basketball. If you're a Grizzlies fan, you should want them to do that. And that's where they excel. But to me, that's why this is the most important fix, is like figuring out a way to score in the half court. And the other thing about this is,
I wonder also, are they going to be able to play in transition as much as they did 3 years ago? And if not, you need to balance that with better half court play, even for regular season basketball. Because I wonder about the defensive rebounding and the outlet passing that got that going. And I wonder about the turnover creation that also got that going. A lot of the players who really drove that were not the guys you think of as the speedy guys down the floor. It was Steven Adams. It was Kyle Anderson. It was Anthony Melton. It was that rebounding, outlet passing, defense into offense. A lot of that kind of stuff. You look around the roster, and this is one of the reasons I'm high on Vince Williams. I think he is that kind of player who generates a lot of that kind of stuff. You wonder about the rest of it. Like, Zach Edey, how close is Zach Edey going to be able to be? He's not going to be Steven Adams as a passer in the half court. And that's one of your half court issues. You need to get more out of him as a scorer because you're not going to get as much as a passer. But in terms of transition basketball, how close is he going to be able to get to Steven Adams' effectiveness as a defensive rebounder and outlet passer to generate, get your offense going,
Well, I also do wonder, as I said, they were so heavily reliant on a points per possession basis in the half court offense. Not last year, obviously. Throw that out. The two previous years, they weren't a bad offense because they were so good at offensive rebounding. Can they replicate that again with this group? I think, and it goes to
Steven Adams is probably the best offensive rebounder in basketball that season. So even if Zach Edey is really good on the offensive boards and he's 7'5" and almost 300 pounds, he's probably not going to be as good as Steven Adams was. Steven Adams was the best that season.
Which makes it more important to fix a half-court offense.
Right.
It just does, because you have to have ways to score. And so, to me, I find that really fascinating. Jaren, again, he didn't want to give away what the plan was, but he basically ensured that there is indeed a plan that they've already talked about and is already being thought about as the players work out right now, heading towards
So one thing we haven't talked about that's related to all this conversation, and this definitely falls under the 10 pounds of muscle category of let's wait and see, is all these hits people have been dropping about Zach Edey and 3-point shooting. Jaren dropped hints about that. Scottie Pippen went on our friend Keith Parrish's pod and dropped hints about that.
That's enough of that.
Yeah.
We saw that with Steven Adams.
This is a summer mirage, you think?
I've watched Steven Adams shoot threes and make 8 in a row.
I do think even this season, I think the odds of Zach Edey deploying 3-point attempts in games is higher than it was with Steven Adams.
100%. But it needs
it's still
to be
not high.
Very low volume if he is going to do that.
Right.
It's they're not even defending me at the 3-point line. I'm standing at the top of the key and I'm wide open and I'm going to make him respect this. But it's his rookie year. He doesn't need to be firing off 3-4 game. I just don't.
I think your best case scenario is the post Grizzlies, more post Grizzlies, a little bit Grizzlies, more post Grizzlies Jonas Valanciunas of 1 or 2 a game, wide open, that kind of thing.
Yes. And that would be fine.
Right.
But they shouldn't. They don't need to try to turn Zach Edey into a shooter. The other thing with that is, again, we're talking about how reliant they are going to potentially have to be on offensive rebounding. If Edey's near the basket, he's got a better chance of grabbing.
The one thing, and this is a hyper-specific thing, but the one thing where I think that could be useful to the Grizzlies, if he's a threat, strays the space on the floor, at least to a small degree, is can you get minutes of him and Brandon Clark playing together? Can you get 5 minutes a game?
Well, you do need more options in the front. We've already talked about it. If Edey is not a 3-point shooter, you're going to be playing a lot of Jaren.
That's right.
A lot of Jaren.
So I am looking for ways to make a Zach Edey, Brandon Clark pairing functional in the flow of the game. And if Edey can at least if you leave me wide open, I'm going to take it and I might make it. If he can at least do that, that may help a little bit to get you some Brandon Clark, Zach Edey minutes, you know?
I mean, if we're just doing the what would it look like game, what I would say is because they're non-shooters, if they are non-shooters, I should say, then you would probably think that they wouldn't use them together. But stylistically, to have a big that's athletic with bounce and has the floater versus the bruiser, I think stylistically, if one of them is a shooter, you could play them together.
Yeah, well, here's another thing I would say about that, though. They did play, they didn't do it a lot, and it wasn't like elegant. They did play Brandon Clark and Steven Adams together. And those lineups did okay. And the reason they did okay is something we've talked about. They just dominated the offensive boards. Like when those two players were on the floor together, like it was just like throw it up there and well, we're going to go get it. It was that kind of thing. Yeah.
No. And if you put those guys on the floor with Ja Morant, and you just tell Ja to go to the basket and who cares if you miss, I mean, that might be an effective offense. It really might be. So we'll see. I want to continue this coaching conversation a little bit, but first let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
The other thing I find interesting about the changes, and I know I had already mentioned that I think they put some emphasis in the player development area here because you hired Joe Boylan from Minnesota. You brought in Noah LaRoche. I think those are two pretty big gets, by the way, because two people coming from a place of success, I think it does speak to the investment of the team to be able to pull those guys into the organization and get them. So obviously that's a move in the player development front. You elevated Anthony Carter to a front of bench assistant. You elevated Eric Schmidt, who was a video coordinator and also works with these guys very closely during the offseason, to an assistant coaching position. Like there's clearly a big emphasis here on player development. And I'm curious what you think. Do you think that they did that because of the current stage that this franchise is in, knowing that you've already paid a ton of money to Jaren and to Bane and to Morant, and if you want to be really competitive and go try to win a championship, you pretty much need young players on value contracts to be good role players for you? Do you think that those two things sort of coordinated?
I don't think it's about the stage of the team. I think it's partly like they want to be about that just in a general sense, and they didn't think they were good enough in that area. But I think it's also a recognition of the kind of team you are, the kind of market you're in, that this is going to be a build through the draft or build through. It's player development is going to drive what in the past, in the present, in the future. It's going to drive sort of a lot of what this team does. It's not going to be a free agent destination. It's not probably going to be a team driven primarily by trading for established players. We'll have some of that, Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard. But I think there's a general recognition that drafting or otherwise acquiring, in Scottie Pippen's case, young unproven players and making them better, it sort of has to be, broadly speaking, what you're about as an organization.
Yeah, I think it's also maybe a little bit of I just thought of this now. This is a point that I haven't thought about myself until this moment. It's a little bit of a recognition of what they've already accomplished too, and what got them here.
Yeah,
because Ja was the most improved. Go through the stars. Ja was a most improved player. Desmond Bane made a massive leap from year 1 to year 2. Jaren Jackson became one of the best shot blockers in the league. I mean, he always sort of had the raw talent there, but he refined it and became one of the best shot blockers in the league. And then you've elevated all kinds of two-way players now that have helped you, whether that be John Conchar all the way up to Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson, right? So you even had some guys mixed in between that aren't with the team anymore. I'm thinking of Killian Tilly, Kenneth Lofton, right? So that's kind of how they became this.
You look at a lot of the players who got, Kyle Anderson who was signed by a previous front office is different. Tyce Jones, the first signing of this front office, I guess, was a little bit different. And Steven Adams was a trade. But a lot of the guys who've gotten rotation minutes in this era, not only have they been homegrown, they've been like the only lottery picks were John Moran and Jaren Jackson anyway. And so it's like Desmond Bain late first, Santi Aldama late first, Brandon Clark late first, Xavier Tillman second, like that. And so, they have pulled, as much as people like to harp on the misses, and there are those too, like they've soaked up a lot of minutes on good teams with players who like they developed, outside like the top 5 picks,
Yeah, who got a lot better from year 1 to year 2. Santi Aldama, that is night and day what you saw from year 1 to year 2
right.
with Santi Aldama. So they've been really successful.
It wasn't night and day from year 2 to year 3, and that's one of the interesting questions about him.
Yes,
so is there another step forward you can get out of him this season?
We shall see. I think it was, not to take a detour here on Santi, but I think it was pretty big for him to start at the beginning of year 2 after having a good summer league, because that was a massive confidence builder.
Right.
And I think that kind of really helped him. And then once that got settled in, you just haven't seen it grow. He hasn't had the big leap like that again. But he's interesting to me. But back to the player development thing. Do you think that, you're more of the salary cap guy for me. Is that the formula? Is the formula to, if this team is to get over the hump and win a championship, obviously they're going to depend on the stars, but you need good role players.
Right.
And do you think that's the most logical formula for the Grizzlies to, taking it up another level, is to just continue to build these young guys?
One of the points I made, I did radio, let's say with Jeff, and he was asking me about, different teams in the league. It's like, Isaac Okoro just re-signed with Cleveland. Isaac Okoro, who was a top 10 pick, 3-and-D wing, just did an extension of 3 years, $38 million. There's not much difference between Isaac Okoro and Vince Williams Jr., who the Grizzlies have on a contract that going forward is 3 years and $7 million. And so to the degree that you can, the Vince Williams, Gigi Jackson, Zach Edey, those 3 players over the next 3 years, if you add all the money up, I don't know what it is, but it's probably less than like TJ McConnell's going to be making. That if you hit on that kind of stuff, that's what really can undergird these stars you have who are going to be making all this money. Now, I think the Grizzlies need to have, and they have it now, and Marcus Smart making 20-something million, and they have Brandon Clark and Luke Kennard both in that 10 to 15 range, right? I think you need to have in your budget, you need to be able to have a veteran in the middle of your rotation, veteran or 2 in the middle of your rotation, making market value money, be able to have that beyond just the stars and the bargains. So I think you need to have that in the middle. Can they maintain that as they move forward if you get Jaren into a new contract and all of that? I think it's to be determined. The other thing I would say is the upside is higher when you hit on these young guys like the Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson, all that. But there is risk and I think you saw this 2 years ago, throwing so many darts in that direction, hoping you hit them, that on a contending team, you got too much young guys. So I do think the Grizzlies, and again, they hit with Vince Williams, hit with Gigi Jackson. I think they've been a little too reticent to go out in free agency and like get a proven guy on a cheapish contract that can help you. And, instead of having, David Roddy and Kennedy Chandler and Jake LaRavia on your roster, maybe you get 2 of those 3 guys on their roster, and then you go sign someone, like Dallas signed Derrick Jones Jr. to a vet minimum. Like, I think they've been a little too reticent to go into free agency and make a back end of the rotation, back into the roster, veteran like guy you can rely on kind of signing. And so I'll be interested to see as you go through this season into the next, are you still going to like speculate with so now you're getting Jalen Wells, right? And if Jalen Wells hits, that's going to be awesome. You'll have him on this cheap contract, and he'll be really good. What if he doesn't pan out? That's a roster spot you got that you could have had. You could have tried to sign the next Derrick Jones Jr. on, right? I'm a little surprised they haven't been more willing to use 1 or 2 roster spots for that kind of player. They did it with Derrick Rose, but that was for locker room stuff mostly. There was no chance Derrick Rose was going to be what Derrick Jones Jr. was to Dallas.
You know, I didn't think they were going to use both second-round picks for that reason.
Yeah.
And they went ahead and used them both.
They are very into trying to find these guys, and the success rate is good, and it's hard to criticize them because when you hit on one Vince Williams, that's worth so much, right? Or one whoever. But I do still wonder, do you use too many roster spots? Because now they're leaving one open they're going to elevate a young guy into. Once you hit this competitive range, maybe you want 1 or 2 roster spots for some vets, at the back end.
I know you've done like a lot of roster rankings and you maybe have never thought about this, but have you ever thought about like what the best value contracts are for the Grizzlies relative to performance? Because like you could argue Ja, even on a max deal, is like one of the best players in the NBA. He's worth every penny you're going to pay him.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever thought about those?
I mean, the max thing, because they're max contracts, it's like, the best bargain in the league is whoever the best player is because they're capped. That's just sort of the way it is, because individual players mean so much. There was a pod I listened to, it was Sam Vecini pod when I was driving down from Minnesota, and they did a top 10 contracts in the league pod, and they stipulated we're not doing max contracts for that very reason. And we're not doing rookie scale like auto, because you don't negotiate those, right? Because they said, set aside the max contracts, set aside the rookie contracts, which are both just fixed numbers, right? In terms of negotiated contracts, what are the 10 best contracts in the league? I think they had Jalen Brunson number 1, but 2 Grizzlies on that top 10. And that was Jaren Jackson Jr. and that was Vince Williams Jr. Sort of different ranges, but like the Vince Williams Jr. for $7 million. And then Jaren on a deal that's basically 45, 46 over the next 2 years. Those are good deals.
Yeah.
And Zach Edey, and that's a rookie scale deal because that was outside the range of this conversation. But if Zach Edey is a quality starting center from day one, that's the 10th pick on that 4-year rookie deal.
Yeah.
That's going to be a great one.
Real quick before we get out of here, I was listening to you on Jeff's show this week after my piece went out about the Marcus Smart, Vince Williams stuff. And Jeff was making a point contrarian to what I said, which is that I think Marcus Smart, we talked about this, I think I would start Marcus Smart because I don't like the idea of him playing backup point guard, and I like the idea of Vince Williams, a better rebounder, coming in with that second unit because Ja and Edey are probably going to come off the floor and you're going to lose rebounding.
Right.
Have you done any more thinking about this? I know you've been asked about it a million times. The last time I feel like I sprung it on you and surprised you.
On stuff like that, from a process standpoint for me, when I get into stuff like that, I don't decide my opinion and then write my opinion.
Yeah.
I find out what my opinion is through the process of the writing. And so
Very deep.
Well, it's just, you get into stuff and then you sort of find yourself going in directions. I like the fit. There's a difference between what's the best fit in the starting lineup and what's the best fit for the 48 minutes you're trying to manage. I like the Vince Williams Jr. fit in the starting lineup, but you got to think about what are the trickle-down effects of your rotation and what are the trickle-down effects of your locker room and team chemistry. From a pure 5 players on the floor playing a stretch of minutes together, you tell me I have John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson, Zach Edey. Who's the other player on my roster I'm putting into that spot to maximize this 6 minutes?
Yeah. I
think my answer to that is Vince Williams Jr.
Yeah,
but that
I think I would agree.
But that's not the question.
That's not the question.
Right. And so I'll work through the question.
Speaking of players that can play together, do you think they'll use Vince and Marcus on the floor at the same time?
Oh, I mean, definitely
They're both going to play a lot of minutes. So
I mean, they're both going to play so much that they're going to find themselves on the floor together. But when you're trying to figure out what combinations work better than others, and you're trying to, you're not going to not play a combination that's not as great, but you'll play it less, and play the combination that works better a little bit more. I don't know what they're going to find with that. I suspect the duplication you get from those 2 players would limit them a little bit more. I think you'll want to get one of those 2 guys with Luke Kennard more and that kind of thing,
Do you have a gut feeling about, because, we also discussed the Scotty stuff a lot.
Yep.
We're kind of just throwing out Derrick Rose in those discussions, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if they're using Derrick Rose as a backup point guard.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's not like he's not going to play, but I would, and I know this sounds a certain way to some people, and to me, it's just reality of where he is at this stage of his career. He's a part-time player, both in terms of games played and minutes played. He just is at this stage, and he's been that for a few years now. I would hope that he would not, which is not to say he should never play, but I would hope that he is not in the rotation unless he's hurt kind of thing. I just think they can't. To me, that is not an honest assessment of where he is as a player at this stage of his career. and you're not an honest assessment of what's going to maximize your team. And so, but you only get 50 games with the two ways. And if if there are some games where you need like 10 minutes of like more on ball play and you give it to Derrick Rose instead of Scottie Pippen, like early in the season, I think that will happen some, and B, I don't think it's a big deal if it does.
How long are you in Memphis for?
About a month, more than I had originally planned for some other reasons. I came down earlier. I didn't just come down for training camp because I'm here 2 weeks before that.
Yep.
So I'll be here about a month. And you and I will both be in Nashville for a few days. And I have another little side trip I need to take for personal reasons. I'll be here about a month. And then after that, the back and forth is going to, we'll see how it goes. I've mapped it out, as I've shared with you, but that's all subject to change. But I'll be doing a lot of back and forth throughout the basketball season. Hey,
we're just glad you're still, willing to make those trips, because knowing you could dive through every box score and do, I'm sure, just as good of a job. But the fact that you want to come back is great. That's something that we're going to figure out over the course of the season. But I want, beyond just needing to be here a bunch, I like being at games, and I have investment in covering this franchise from its inception in Memphis. And if they make it to the NBA finals, during this era, I want to be there for it. Right. And so I've thought about that, because even when you, I'm sure the players obviously think about this, but you always wonder, will you ever have the chance to cover a championship team?
Right.
And if I were to ever cover a championship team and it wasn't the Grizzlies at this point, now this is year 6, it would be, I don't know, it wouldn't feel right. I don't know. I feel like it wouldn't feel right. And It's just I do wonder if we'll ever get that opportunity here. And I think that we're going to learn a lot about this team pretty quickly this season. And where they stand. And I'm pretty excited about that. I just really hope we don't go through something like we did last year, because that was pure misery.
No, I think it's going to be, the stakes are going to be fairly high fairly quickly this season, because they have to reassert themselves as a real factor in the mix in the Western Conference.
Yeah, and I think we'll get, we'll probably get that pretty quickly. Orlando's a pretty good first fun test at home. I kind of like that.
I don't want to put too much pressure on one game, but
you know what I mean.
15 games in, you feel like you're there.
You get to start with Utah, so
right.
Hopefully that can be a feel good. Let's just come out and kick the crap out of a bad team. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm very curious to see what the vibes are going to look like. 10, 15, as you said, games into the season. I think everyone will either be pressing panic or we'll be back to planning the parade down Beale Street. And naturally, there will be some overreaction there based on just the way that this season sets up. But I'm looking forward to it. Again, happy birthday to the Daily Memphian. 6 years now. So it's been a really, really special thing to be a part of. Been really happy to be able to be a part of it. You can go read Chris and I's work over at the Daily Memphian. You can go listen to all the other Daily Memphian podcasts. Are you planning on being on the Food Pod again while you're here?
I got no specific plans for that.
No specific
I don't
plans.
know. I am going to be doing a little bit of food writing the next couple weeks.
Okay.
I have a very heavy plate of non-basketball stuff through the beginning of next week. I'm hoping to get all that cleared off my plate so that I can turn my attention more to the NBA.
The plate reference with the food writing,
yes,
very good.
I've gone through the buffet line. It's not that I have filled my plate too high. My plate has been filled for me a little high. And so I got 5 things I got to tick off between now and next Monday. Then after that, I can get my mental energy a little bit more basketball focused.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. My friend is getting married this weekend. I'm in the wedding. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm at this stage of my life now where it feels like I have to go to 5 weddings every summer, which isn't really good for you financially, but you feel somewhat obligated to be there. So that's what I will be doing this weekend. I do think we're going to have some more Grizzlies content coming up. So I would be checking the website. I have a couple things in the waiting. So make sure you're going and reading that over at the Daily Memphian. Check out all of Chris's stuff while he is back here in Memphis. And go listen to the new Tigers pod. I guess it's not new, but there's a new person on the podcast, John Martin of 92.9. So you can go listen to him. He writes about the Tigers for the Daily Memphian as well. Well, until next week, for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.